Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I am the author of 12 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, most importantly an elite performance coach of over 19 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. Most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long-term for the long game towards a top 10 tennis ranking. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into the latest rankings and results on the WTA and ATP tours and deliver new data implications as shared in my latest release, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking, with over 80 episodes to date. Today's insights and key topic plays its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach for that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So, as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've been with us for some time now, thank you so much. You know what we're all about. If this is one of your first episodes, thank you so much. But I really would encourage you to track back to some of our earlier episodes, around episodes say 50 through to 60, to really get a feel for where we've been going, especially with our new change of format that it's really taken off over the last say 8 to 12 weeks, and I can't believe it's been that long either. But I've been having a lot of fun with you as we've really been breaking down key data insights and their respective implications on both the WTA and ATP tours. And I think it goes without saying, Indian Wells, Miami, Charleston to Houston, and now Monte Carlo underway. We've really got some exciting insights, especially over the last, I'll say 4 to 6 weeks. And it's really gaining traction as we lead up towards Roland Garros. And I can't believe, and maybe you're on the same level here, that from the Australian Open and all of the data that we captured there from key insights and how far we've come since my latest release, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking, that was my latest book, made available late December. And we are in April now, which is almost unbelievable. But you are familiar, again, if you've been with us for some time, that those specific implications from that text have really, I think, led the way and allowed for these new data insights to be shared. And I'll just quickly touch on what I mean by data implications, etc., because I think data's become a bit of a buzzword across the tennis landscape. So it's really important to clarify that this is new data analytics here. So typically the data that informs players and or coaches game and their insights from how they coach, etc., plan the match ahead. It's very different. What this data really pinpoints is specifically and more concisely or precisely a player's game and their technical metrics, that our data is a world first to be able to uncover not only how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, but specific player technical implications and how they work together, but as well as the 7 keys. So recall the 8th key that was shared in my latest release, but previous to that we had the other book, The 7 Keys to Optimize Your Life, using tennis to develop behaviors that deliver optimal performances in play and in life. It's a very long subtitle there, but essentially that's using tennis to share 7 specific modes of how we learn. And then my latest book I shared the 8th, but that was a whole book that took how, and it's really intensive from that perspective. So it's not necessarily an easy task, because that top 10 tennis ranking does not happen overnight. So there's so much data that goes into it and behind it, and how all of these books, so 11 specific non-fiction books that have essentially led the way to share how. So no one else in the world has this. Super exciting. However, again, Beyond Top 10 Tennis is here to share more and to, I guess, share that additional layer on what it takes and to simplify some of these key metrics, but also to specifically share the ranking implications when we're looking at key progressions, but also what those rankings can tell us as well inadvertently, and how they essentially contribute towards our metrics, because there's a unique formula there that interplays with a player's ranking. And if you've read up on my latest article or blog post, it's really about how rankings do not tell the whole truth. Because there are, and we'll get to that shortly, but why some players, they're progressing, others are regressing, and they don't add up with their performances. And I think the biggest players at this moment on the WTA tour is Danielle Collins, which has really had a positive, especially last 4 to 6 weeks, and her ranking has only catched up now, I'd say, almost with her performance. The other player would be then Swiatek. Well, we could say on the ATP tour, Djokovic, however, he's got so many points, it keeps him at number 1, because his performance has not been, let's say, as a number 1 over the last probably 4 to 6 weeks. Obviously, prior to that, an absolutely different story. Same with Alcaraz, back to 3. But again, this is really just a snapshot, which is really important to underscore. But we can look at a broader landscape. And so I really want you to be mindful here that a lot of this work is a longitudinal analysis. So it's taken the last 11 plus years to pinpoint different behaviors, different patterns of play, that we've gotten so good at that. Being able to dissect, in a way, the best players in the world, including those with what do they have, roughly 80 Grand Slams plus between them. So yes, those 4, whether it's Serena, Roger, Rafael, Novak, all of them, and how they've also contributed. But that's just some. Obviously, you pick every single player that has reached the round of 16 at a Grand Slam over a specific time frame, they've been included. But we also have players where they've been inside the top 10, on the cusp of the top 10. It's incredibly extensive, with more than 150,000 inferences. And I do repeat that almost every episode to share how robust and rigorous I think the data is, and how it's not subjective. This is essentially objective from a factual standpoint, which again is really exciting. But also it's really important to, I think, underscore, given everyone has an opinion these days, which is subjective, and everyone's entitled to that opinion. But we're trying to break through all of that to share what's really out there, what you really need to do, what you really need to integrate, apply, or adapt in your game today, this week, this month, throughout the next 12 months to progress towards that top 10 tennis ranking. And we do have that 10-year pathway towards 20 years of play, and it's incredibly extensive. And as I shared in last episode, or our previous episode, the AMA International is going through a little bit of an overhaul at the moment, and we will have that live, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And we have a new term that I touched on in our previous episode about point of inception. So it's really going to give you an indication of where to start. It's essentially sharing more, trying to simplify the scientific jargon so each and every one of you can understand what's going on, what's necessary, what you need to work in conjunction with your coach. And that's really important, that we're here for the two of you. If I go once player, the second's coach, to how to optimize that dynamic to head towards whether it's top 100, top 50, top 10, but also how we have got the data that really underscores why a player hovers at 80 in the world to say 70 in the world, and they stay there throughout an entire season to say 40 to 30 in the world, and they stay there. But then we can look at those that progress continuously, and then they're able to maintain those peak performance levels more consistently than others. And we've touched on previously that baseline, how one peak performance reaches a new baseline, and then the following peak performance is that next baseline, and how it's essentially a continuation of building on one to the next, to the next, to the next, and how the data gets you there. Okay, with that brief introduction there, a recap of some really important metrics to how the data informs a lot of what's to be shared. We're going to start with the WTA Tour, look at the top 100 rankings, and then we're going to cross over to the current, I think, tournaments that have been underway the past week, and then we'll cross on over to the ATP Tour and do the same for them. So it's really important, I think, to underscore different, I think, ranking progressions, regressions, but then also couple that with the results. And through that, I'm going to share some key and or additional insights, and let's all be mindful of those 8 primary keys. So even though they're across 2 texts, how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking is underscored by those 8 keys, being mindful again that those 7 keys are a prerequisite before that 8th key, and how you can essentially integrate them into your game to do the same. So whether you are a top 10 player or you're at your local club and or academy, it's all applicable, because we've got top 10 players that will be regressing outside the top 10, those inside the top 20 who will ascend to become a barrier breaker into the top 10, and how our data informs that, and our predictive analytics, which is again very exciting. But the best part, it allows us to say, well, this is why that happened, and this is what you need to integrate into your game now. This is what your game is missing. So recall again the What Is Your Game Missing series, which is 3 texts, which is packed, all of them are packed with data, but also players on the WTA and ATP tours, and specifically underscoring what they need to do in their game to progress, or if they are more susceptible to regressing. So remember the rule that came out this year from my latest text, which is 8% of players in the world on the WTA and ATP tours know what's at stake, and that's inside the top 10, which means on a global scale it's very different. But 2% of those players will regress each and every season. So we're really pinpointing the top 100 players when I say in the world, but when we really broaden that to being more literal, it's incredibly, those percentage points become a lot smaller. So it's actually quite substantial. All right, let's dive in head first. We've got 100 on the WTA Tour. Zarazua has hit, so she's cracked into the top 100 with that key progression. Daria Saville, the Aussie, she has been as high inside the top 30, I believe, a couple of seasons ago. Did regress, has dealt with some very long-term injuries that she's had. She's back inside the top 100 at 94, moving 14 places up, which is really great to see. Badosa, she has been almost consistently regressing, unfortunately. So she's back 9 points to 91. Benchik's at 90. She has regressed 28 points. However, we know she's had most of this season off, if not all of this season, and I believe she'll probably be taking a lot more off, being that she is taking leave. Other notable players, we've got Maria Lourdes Carl up 14 places, 284. 24-year-old from Argentina. That is a very big jump. Let's see if that tracks forward over the upcoming weeks. Marasova, 8 points up to 83 in the world. Peyton Stern's taken a little bit of a hit. She's back 15 places, 80 in the world. But she's only 22 years of age, and she has been a bit of a standout this season, despite what the ranking's suggesting. So dare I say that she looks like, especially over the next 6 to 12 months, she should be tracking forward if she starts to integrate more keys into her game. So recall, when you're around 80 in the world, typically you've got 1-2 of those keys already solidified in your game, but it's really about learning and ascertaining those additional keys and progressively fine-tuning them and allowing them to become more frequented in your game. Okay, that was a lot. Christian, she's at 75, up 8 points, which is a great, I think, progression. Yafan Wang, remember her from the Australian Open, almost taking out Zheng in that incredible tiebreaker. I've mentioned that a number of times because that was a standout match for me. I even wrote a blog post on that with really, I think, important key metrics there. She's had a slight regression, so she's at 71, but she definitely has the tools to progress further. Kruger is up to 69 in the world. Maria is back 66 places, 20 places to 66 in the world. Osorio, she has had a substantial week with her second career title. She's up 22 points to 63 in the world. Noteworthy here, she's 22 years of age, Colombian, and given that it's her second title, I'm going to flag Osorio now to progress inside the top 50 this season. Schneider has taken a little bit of regression, 62 in the world, back 4 places. Again, only 20 years of age, but remember, she already has a title to her name this season. Kenin, slight regression, 61 in the world. Lynette is up 3, 60 in the world. Kvitova is up 2, so she's sitting at 58. Taylor Townsend is on a career high, I believe, at the moment, 57 in the world, up 11 places, and she has had some solid performances of late. Cocchiaretto sitting at 55, just up 1 place there, but I'd say pretty comfortable there. And there's a number of players that follow. All right, we've got Purintseva. She's up 2 places to 50. Now remember, Purintseva has had some positive progressions over the last couple of weeks with some key performances. So this is noteworthy for her to crack inside the top 50. That's something to keep an eye on. Pliskova is up to 47. Bronzetti is up to 46. A couple of other noteworthy players as we crack inside the top 40 is Sloane Stephens is sitting comfortable at 40 in the world. Mira Andreeva is back just slightly at 39 in the world. Vekic is back slightly. She's at 37. Potapova, 36. Tracking forward now, Yastremska's at 33. She's been pretty comfortable hovering there since the Australian Open. Noskova, 31. Similar. She has been, I think, inside the top 30 briefly, so a slight regression here. Fernandez is at 34. She's still sitting around there, but let's remember Fernandez, after making the US Open final, she's 21 years of age and she has been hovering and holding her own there. I think that's a very big in contrast to, for example, say Raducanu, who's had a number of injuries and has had quite substantial regressions, especially as far as performance and rankings are concerned. But Layla has been able to hold her own, and both similar age ranges there. All right, back into the top 30. So Stay is holding her own at 29. Bolter, she was a little bit higher, but she's comfortable there at 28. Kostyuk, again from the Australian Open, and Kalinskaya from the Australian Open. Both of them maintaining their hold inside the top 30, 27 and 26 respectively. Azarenka's up slightly, 25 in the world. Krejcikova, slight progressions, 24. Then Garcia is at 23. Pavlyuchenkova is 22, and Navarro is back slightly to 21, which is a little bit surprising because she did crack the top 20. I think she was at 19 the other week. But all of these players, especially the top 25, have really been making positive inroads with those performances, and I would say probably 90% of them respectively do have roughly 4 to 5 keys, and this is how I think brutal the keys and concise are, because this is the key differentiator when we're looking at what separates, say, the top 30 players, top 25 players in the world from the top 20, and then we move forward the top 20 to 15 from those almost ascending into the top 10, and why players are not ascending inside the top 10. So what's holding them back? And we know it's because those keys are not solidified in their game. Keys is sitting at 20, Kudermetova 19, Svitolina's slight regression, so she's at 18. Alexandrova, from her performance, let's say, at Miami was exceptional, especially with that win over Swiatek. 16 she's at. Collins is the standout. She almost cracked into the top 20 after, I think it was Miami, was around 22, but now 15 in the world after Charleston. So recall a few weeks ago. And if not, for most of this season, Collins really has been flagged as that top 20 player. And finally, the rankings have been catching up to her, which is great to see. Definitely Collins is flagged to potentially become a barrier breaker if she keeps this level of play up, without a doubt. And I believe she only has a very small number of ranking points to defend over the next couple of months, which essentially flags her to ascend closer and closer into the top 10 and potentially become the next barrier breaker of the season. Noteworthy though is Paolini is comfortable. She is sitting at 14, hasn't budged, I think, since that standout performance a couple of months ago, but it was Dubai, Qatar. However, she's going to be similar on a similar road. She will not have as many points to defend because of this new ranking high. So it's going to be very interesting between the two to show those contrasting results, because we know Collins has had standout performances previously and she's really finding that new peak performance now. So when we're looking at defending points, Collins is really on a more positive trajectory in contrast to Paolini, irrespective of Paolini's newfound high. However, it's clay court season, and Paolini is going to be very interesting to see how her game holds up, because she could very well nudge closer towards the top 10. I won't flag her as a barrier breaker just yet. I'm definitely going to put Collins before that. McCo's been regressing. That said, she has been sidelined, so that is of no surprise. Haddad Maia is holding her own at 13. Kasatkina has had a very good week, especially reaching the finals at Charleston, but she's still sitting on the cusp of the top 10 at 11. Kasatkina alongside Collins, both of them are definitely flagged to become barrier breakers. They're just a little bit shy of those points. Ostapenko is at 10, looks to be more susceptible to switching places with Kasatkina. However, Jabeur has regressed 3 points to number 9 in the world, which I think ironically is her lowest ranking in probably the last 2 to 3 seasons, because she has more comfortably been positioned inside the top 10, which is somewhat interesting. We know her performance has been regressing. It has not been on par with a top 10 player's performance. She does have the rankings up her sleeve though, which means if she's not going to be defending points over the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks, anything's a given here, we will see new barrier breakers. The same applies for Vondrousova's. She's at 8, but also Ostapenko. Ostapenko had a stellar start to the season. We haven't really seen that tracking forward, let's say the last 3 to 4 weeks, but the same applies for Zheng. Even though she's progressed 1 up to 7, her performance has not been on par with those rankings this season. If not, there's probably, if we're looking at it more closely, 7, 8, 9, 10 have not been on par, with a slight exception there for Ostapenko because she is a barrier breaker this season, and she really did start again the season in stellar form, but we're looking for that level of maintenance, that baseline that has that peak performance that is essentially on a continuation, that it's reaching round of 16 quarterfinals or deeper more consistently, at least 75% of the time when you're a top 10 player, which are really harsh metrics. However, we are only seeing players inside, I'll say, the top 5, but I say that loosely because Sakari's up 1 to 6. She did briefly regress outside the top 10 a few weeks ago. Obviously, she's firmly back inside the top 10 after, I think it was her results at Indian Wells. That said, however, we're looking, Sakari's been performing, Pegula has been performing. She had a slow start to the season. She has picked it up. Rybakina is, of course, performing. Gauff has been. Sabalenka is on a little bit of a lull there. Hasn't been, say, playing the same level of play from the Australian Open that allowed her to lift her second slam. Swiatek, without a doubt, has been tracking forwards, has been playing her own. Did fall a little bit short in Miami. That said, she's had a stellar, I would say probably 6 to 8 weeks, without a doubt. So that's what's really interesting, I think, as far as the top 10's concerned. And I have the last 2 to 3 weeks written a lot about that to really showcase top 10, what's at stake, but also what the rankings, all the underlying message behind that, what a lot of, I think, people don't understand from how this really informs a player's performance, and when we're looking at the data, how that informs, I think, that endpoint, those results. All right, let's switch on over to the first event that we can look at that has wrapped up a few days ago, and that, of course, is Charleston, and it was more exciting than I actually personally anticipated, because there were some standout matches here. We're going to pick up from the round of 32. Last week we touched on those earlier rounds. Haddad Maia, very good win over Dolhide, straight sets there. Navarro over Volnets, 1-1. That's why it's a little bit surprising she's had a slight ranking regression, but it's very small. Azarenka, good win against Cocchiaretto. That's 1-2, very brutal. However, Cocchiaretto has been progressing, so has Azarenka. So it's very interesting to look at, I think, the significant ranking difference. I think Cocchiaretto's around 50 to 60 in the world to Azarenka. So it's a very, I think, standout scoreline. Kalinina got the win over Wozniacki, 2-3. Really important to underscore the level of play here, only because a couple of weeks ago, Wozniacki, let's say she threw some shade at the current level, which I really disagree with. She's sitting around 118, I think it was, in the world. She has had a slight rankings progression. I think she was around in the 120s. She did start the year around 250, for example. So she has been tracking forward. However, in contrast, Osaka started the year around, I think, 800 in the world, and she's just cracked inside the top 200, around 193, I think she's sitting, which is exceptional. So I think that goes without saying that maternity leave for Osaka, I don't know why there was no protective ranking there, but Wozniacki, obviously, having been away from tour for some time, I would definitely say the current crop of play is... it's been compounded in contrast to previous levels, and that's really important to underscore, especially when you're looking at the data, a level of play, and those results, etc. All right, Kasatkina had a very good win over Kruger. That went to 3 sets, and Kruger got the second set 6-love. Kasatkina the third 6-1. That's a very interesting scoreline. Townsend over Alexandrova. Now remember, Alexandrova had an exceptional week previously. I think she got those solid wins over Swiatek, and I'm pretty sure it was Pegula from memory. Absolutely exceptional. Moved up slightly in the rankings, and now Townsend 7-5-6-2. That has to be Townsend's most stellar win, if not this season, over the last couple. So she's definitely deserving that ranking high. Even though I think I briefly said earlier it was around 57, still to get that win over a top 15-ish player is a standout. All right, Rogers fell to Kudermetova, and Sharma, the Aussie, got a very good win over Sorenko, 6-4, 6-love. Okay, moving on to the round of 16 here. Svitolina fell to Mertens. This is somewhat surprising, but we have seen, I think, Mertens sitting around 30 in the world. We know Mertens has been and can be a stellar player, but still a little bit surprising given Svitolina's level of play so far this season. So that's something to keep an eye on to see if there's going to be a slight regression there. Sharma did fall in the round of 16 to Sakari, 6-4, 6-1. Very solid sets, very standout for Sharma there, but Sakari, 6-1 in the second. She's showing her game, and I'm really proud of her results. Collins over Stevens, 2-2. Very solid. Now remember, again, this is round of 16. Haddad Maia fell to Kudermetova. Somewhat surprising given Haddad Maia is ahead of her in the rankings. So this is where we're being mindful of how the rankings don't always tell the whole truth, and how when a player is tracking forward and their peak performances are tracking forward, sometimes it's not that surprising if they get a win over a player ranked higher than them. Kasatkina did get a good win over Kalinina. Now, very good for Daria, 1-4, and why she has been tracking not so much forward in the rankings. She has been hovering outside the top 10 for some time. However, it's almost like that performance plateau at a very high level, on the cusp, somewhat stuck before progressing inside the top 10. And this is where that 7th key to the 8th key really underscores, I think, that key differential. But Kasatkina is definitely primed to become a barrier breaker. Azarenka, very good win over Townsend. 3 sets goes 6-7, 6-3, 6-4. Navarro fell to Christian, 3 sets. Pegula, good win over Lynette, 2-2. Then we've got, again, for some round, we've got the round of 32. So this was 2-4 for Svitolina, sorry. So even though we're focusing on round of 16, I'm backtracking slightly here. These were some of the delayed matches. Stevens over Fernandez, again, in the round of 32. This is a standout that I did miss earlier, so I really want to highlight this match. Round of 32, Collins got that win over Jabeur 6-3, 1-6, 6-3. Now, if that does not tell you a top 10 players differential, why Jabeur's been regressing, Collins is on that peak performance. Essentially, ranking-wise, we're looking at Collins being top 10 here and Jabeur being around top 15 if we're really looking at those performance outcomes. So that's a very, I think, interesting to pinpoint. All right, now we are over to the quarterfinals. Sakkari, very good win, straight sets over Kudermetova. Kasatkina, 3 sets over Christian. Collins, 3 and 4 over Mertens. That's rock solid. Pegula over Azarenka. This was an exciting match. 6-4, 3-6, 7-6. And that tiebreak, it could have gone either way. I believe both players had match points and it was absolutely brutal. But that was essentially equipped to be a final, if not semi-final match. Okay, I'm being a little bit more quicker now. Semi-finals, we had Sakkari and Collins. Collins with the win, 3-3. Then Kasatkina surprisingly got a very good win over Pegula, 6-4, 4-6, 7-6. Again with that tiebreak, Pegula, but I'm really happy to see Pegula starting to live up to that ranking, essentially because the initial part or the beginning of this season, Pegula really wasn't, I'd say, living up to her ranking expectations. So it's really good to see that now. We know the results of the final, but 6-2, 6-1, that was not anticipated. That is absolutely clean from Collins, and Kasatkina had been progressing forward in her level of play. So that is incredible for Collins with that win. All right, over to Zurich, so the Columbia. Let's pick up from day 3. We did those first couple of days last week. We're going to go pretty quickly through. Buska over Naimas, straight sets. Barra over Pigossi, 3 sets. Rakimova over Zarazua, 3 sets. Zarazua, though, did have that ranking progression. Irani, she is turning the clock back, 3 sets over Sorobes Tormo. All right, other side of the round of 16, we had Seidman over Jones, 3 sets. Buska over Baptiste, my apologies, is straight sets. Maria over Riera, 3 sets. Very interesting though, 2-6, 6-love, 6-2. Azorio, Todoni, 7-6, 6-4 to Azorio. Now we've got the quarterfinals here. Azorio, Maria, 3 sets. Buskova over Seidman, 3 sets. Very tight. Buska over Rakimova, 3 sets. And wow, Irani over Barra, 3 sets. Really want to underscore, if all of these quarterfinals are going to 3 sets, that's really underscoring a heightened level of play from all players in the quarterfinals, which we don't always see. Normally we see one lopsided over the other, and we really see, I think, the rankings differential here. But right now, irrespective of ranking, we are seeing a very streamlined level of play at a very high level if all 8 players are taking each one to the edge, essentially. Also, with the third sets in all of these quarterfinals being quite tight, not necessarily lopsided. Okay, semi-finals, Buska over Rakimova, 6-4, 7-6. Osorio, a very good win over Irani, 7-6, 6-4. And we know the outcome for that final, Osorio with the win over Buskova, 6-3, 7-6. So as I shared in the rankings, Osorio is definitely one to keep an eye out for. All right, the next event we're keeping tabs on is over in Spain, which has wrapped up. But let's start at the round of 16. We did touch on those earlier days last week. We'll go relatively quickly through here. Masarova over Borzaz Maniero, straight sets. Sonomers over Lice. I'll say straight sets. sets. Lies retired 3-1 in the second. Carl over Jimenez Kanceva, 3 sets. Shrimakova over Mladenovic, 3 sets. And Selekmetiva over Korwa, 3 sets. I really do try to pronounce, but I really do apologize if I have, for the mispronunciation, because I'm quite positive that there's definitely some there. Here we go. All right, round of 16, Galfi over Basols Ribeira, 1-love, retired. So there's definitely an injury, unfortunately, underway there. Jackie Mo over Kraus, 3 sets, and Danilovic over Rus in straight sets. Okay, quarterfinal stage, Masarova over Shmakova, 3 sets. Danilovic over Giacomo, 3 sets. Galfi over Sonmez, straight sets, 7-6 in the second though. Carl over Selekmetiva, straight sets. That is a tongue twister. Thank you so much for bearing with me and my pronunciation. Masarova over Dalanovic, straight sets. Carl over Galfi, however, 6-1, 1-1. So Galfi did retire, unfortunately, in the second set. That's 2 retirements in one tournament. Now, you have heard me, if you've been listening to us for some time now, that injuries are not okay. They do happen because of the mismanagement, but also the load that a player may or not be used to, and not following, I think, a more precise periodization framework, but also when we're looking at the technical parameters. It's really important to underscore here when we're looking at the data, the technical metrics, etc., and what I personally developed with these new technical implications, parameters to adopt and integrate into your game. They are also designed to mitigate injuries, to protect the player, because there are so many injuries out there that are due to incorrect technique, so technical parameters, key, let's say, serial skills, discrete skills. Oftentimes the discrete ones, which obviously make up that serial skill. So if you're looking at the forehand ground stroke, discrete skill is the movement in between, whether it's raising the elbow too high, contacting the ball too close to the body, etc. Just as really, I think, simple examples there. Obviously, you can understand if you're hitting with an incorrect technique over and over again, you're loading your body, those joints, those muscles, I think those ligaments, for example, they will get strained and or compromised. So essentially, what we're looking for is that it is absolutely fundamental to integrate these new technical metrics into your game, not only optimize your performance to ascend towards a top 10 tennis ranking, but to protect yourself, to provide longevity. So it's essentially a win-win. Everything that I've built and designed at and through AIMA International and through all of these 11 publications is to safeguard the player, build a more robust player, more powerful player that delivers not just a top 10 tennis ranking, but is built to achieve Grand Slam success. Really exciting, but this is a perfect example, I think, to run that home. All right, the finals, we saw Carl over Masarova, 3 sets, 3-6, 6-1, 6-2. All right, that wraps up the WTA Tour, so I think it's time to head straight over to the ATP Tour and begin with these rankings. Okay, to kick things up, we've got Monte at 100. He has regressed 3 places. Goffin's at 99, so he's cracked back into the top 100, 3 places. Really, I think, interesting to note here, Goffin, we know, was a top 10 player, and we know, if not top 20, for a substantial, I think, period of his career, and he has an absolutely, I think, profound game that is essentially underrated, incredibly skilled. So it's really good to see him tracking forward. Thiem has regressed back 6 places, 96 in the world. It's pretty heartbreaking. He's 30 now, and with these regressions, and he has had that, let's say, ailing wrist injury But something I think is really important here to underscore, and it's something that I heard Theme share in one of his, let's say, social media posts, is that the wrist doesn't give him the strength that it used to give him. Something really important, I think, to underscore is that Theme was a top 10 player. He has a Grand Slam to his name. He knows those 8 keys. What's really fundamental here is to let the upper body guide you, but the lower body does the work. So if you have, let's say, a weaker upper body, that's essentially the case. Your lower body should be absolutely stronger. You've got your biggest muscle groups in your lower body, and this is really talking about your technical metrics, your biomechanics, human movement, all of that, your physiology. And I think what happens here when a player puts too much strain on a wrist, and unfortunately I've heard some top coaches, I'll say in brackets, share this, which is incredibly incorrect, that the wrist does a lot of the work. And again, I think it's really important to underscore that, yes, I do hold the highest coaching qualification worldwide. So these coaches, even if they do hold a substantial coaching qualification, it's really important to underscore that on top of my coaching qualifications is my master's in this area and my doctorate. Not one coach worldwide comes close to these qualifications, which really differentiates me and puts me on another level above these guys. And I really want to underscore this in the most politest and respectful way, because they do not have the knowledge, they have not been educated, they have not done the hard work when we're looking at the data. Practically and working with players, of course they have that. But when we're looking at injuries and mitigating injuries and knowing essentially that roadmap to develop a top 10 player, this is not their forte. A lot of these coaches get players already in the top 10 or already at a peak performance metric. We're looking at long term. There are, and I've shared this a couple of times, only a handful of players on both cumulatively the WTA and ATP tour who know what it takes to develop a player with a lower ranking, so let's say 600, 500 in the world, and to ascend them. Ferrero with Alcaraz is an absolutely perfect example. Swiatek and her coach is a perfect example. So that makes 2. But we're looking at coaches who are able to do that over and over again. So it's not just a one-off instance or inference, and that's what's really important. These coaches, however, it's again really important, they contribute to the data inadvertently, which allows us again to share how you're able to track forward and develop that top 10 tennis ranking, because each and every player is unique. Looking at how one team, coach and player, works together is not the be-all and end-all, because that's just one example. So we really need to look across the board of how it really works, to fine-tune and to share what those 7 keys to that 8th key does, which obviously has been the case. So when we're looking at Theme and his wrist, it's really heartbreaking, but it's a perfect example of sharing the detriment of what can happen once you reach a peak performance, the regression that unfortunately can follow from that overloading of a joint if caution has not been taken. Okay, that was long. Fognini, he's cracked back into the top 100 a couple of weeks ago, but he's now forward at 94 in the world. Nagal's back into the 100. He's tracking forward at 93 now in the world. Tarante, a very big jump, 17 places progression. The 22-year-old from Argentina, he's now 91 in the world. Bautista Agut has had a progression, 90 in the world. Nakashima, the 22-year-old American's 88 now in the world. How about this for a huge jump? It's great to see Berrettini back inside the top 100. 51 points. He has jumped now to 84 in the world. That is absolutely substantial. We know Berrettini was ranked inside the top 100 for a number of seasons. We know he's got it in his game. We know he has been able to develop the 8th keys previously. However, he has not been able to hold on to them. And that's what's really important, that you may know what those 8th keys are and to solidify them in your game, but if you are not consistently and consciously integrating them into your game each and every training session, week in, week out per season, you will regress. But once you become mindful of these 8 subsets and you nurture them in the best possible way, that is what allows you to maintain your hold inside the top 8 and the top 8% of players in the world. All right, 79 is Wawrinka, so he's slightly tracking forward 3 places there. Fucsovics is up 8 points to 77. Nardi, slight regression there, 76 in the world. Kazuk's good to see him really holding, I think, relatively still there. The 21-year-old who was flagged to progress this season is at 75. Mensik at 74. Carabella's at Baena. He's regressed 9 points to 73 in the world. All right, Seyboth Wild. He's holding steady around 68. Just a slight regression there. Kekmanovic, 16 places of regression, 66 in the world. Darderi is at 64 in the world, 8 places forward, the 22-year-old Italian. Italy does have a number of players inside the top 100, which is great to see, obviously, with Sinner leading the charge there. Halfman is back 8 points to 61 in the world. Murray is sitting firm at 59. I'm looking for a couple of more notable players. Here we go. Navone is up 9 places to 51 in the world. Evans is back 8 to 50 in the world. McCack is, I'll say, holding firm at 47, but he is back slightly 4 places. A couple of other noteworthy players. We've got Monfils up 5 points to 40 in the world. Analdi is back 3 to 38. Marozan is up 1 to 37 in the world. Felix, slight progression at 35. Thompson's up slightly 1 to 32 in the world. All right, as we're edging closer and closer towards the top 20, at 23 we've got TFO. He's slight regression at 2, but it's good to see him holding, I'll say, relatively firm at 23 in the world. And now inside the top 20 has relatively stayed the same. Paul is at 16, a slight regression with Humbert, slight regression at 15, because Shelton is up 2 places to a career high, 14 in the world. Great to see, and we know his result at Houston, so that is incredibly well deserved. I have to say though, Houston has been his standout performance. I have been a little bit, let's say, cautious about Shelton becoming a barrier breaker. He hasn't really lived up to the hype this season. I expected a bit more from him over the last, say, 2 to 3 months, but now he really has come almost full circle when we're looking at a top 20 ranking and tracking forward, because he's starting to make his move. This is very good to see. What we're looking at now is that continuation. He's definitely reached that peak performance, what we know or knew he was capable of, and now it's come out of the shadows again. So let's see if it's out of the shadows now consistently, or if it tracks back slightly to around 20 in the world and hovers, so somewhat of a plateau. So we know he's a little bit susceptible to that because he has been sitting around the same ranking range so far all season. However, if Shelton continues to track forward, he is definitely primed to become a barrier breaker and the #1 American on the ATP tour. So this is going to be very interesting to watch over the coming weeks, and especially leading into the French Open. And again, because Houston was on clay, to see again how this tracks. All right, Fritz is he just sitting there at 13? We know he's top 10 status, but he has been regressing. So his ranking really is aligning, I think, with his performance. That said, Shelton's performing ahead of Fritz at this stage. Tsitsipas, he's just hovering there at 12 in the world. We know he was inside the top 10 for a number of seasons. That said, this is where the rankings really are true, because his level of play is not top 10 status. So I would really like to see more from him. However, we are heading into now clay court season. We know Tsitsipas can make his mark. It's going to be very interesting if he picks up speed here. I definitely think Tsitsipas has it in him to crack back inside the top 10 if he takes advantage of the clay court season. However, if we see those earlier rounds where he's exiting, Tsitsipas will regress closer, let's say, to 20, which will be very surprising to see. That said, he does have a number of ranking points up his sleeve. De Minaur is hovering again at 11. We know he was inside the top 10, then outside, then inside. Now he's outside. It's not to say his performances have not been living up to his level of play. He definitely does deserve, I would say, that top 10 ranking. It's really a case of switching those points between Rudd, Dimitrov and Hurkacz. Hurkacz has surged ahead with his recent win in Estoril. That said, likewise with Dimitrov and Rudd have been progressing. However, De Minaur is more, I will say, progressive in his results and his performance over Rudd, who has regressed 2 points back to 10 in the world. So I would say the next 2 to 3 weeks will be a very interesting sign to see if these two switch places. More than likely, I wouldn't be surprised if De Minaur tracks back into the top 10 and Rudd regresses outside, but these two are changing places. That said, Rune, he is one player inside the top 10 who has not been living up to his top 10 status. He's sitting at 7. He does have a couple of points ahead of him to his name. So I would not be surprised, and to even out, let's say, the top 10's playing field, for Rune to regress outside the top 10 and then the rest to stay, because the rest, including De Minaur, have been performing at top 10 status. It's really Rune and obviously Tsitsipas, who's already outside the top 10 at 12, that have not been living up to, let's say, that top 10 status. Obviously the WTA, I've noticed there was really around the top 6, really those 5 players, 50%, who really have had a new peak performance baseline that differentiates them from the other 50% of the top 10. In this case, we're really fine-tuning it because we have players from, say, Sinner, Medvedev, I'm going to put in there, Zverev, and I'm going to probably put Dimitrov in there as well, and De Minaur, even though he's 11, who've been holding their own. So that's roughly, let's say, 50-60%. But then we've got Rudd, maybe. Dimitrov and Hurkacz are on a current peak performance cycle. Rublev has not been performing, let's say, as well over the last couple of weeks. Zverev's been relatively consistent, and obviously Medvedev's in there as well. But Alcaraz has taken a few hits lately. That said, I mean, come on, Indian Wells. Sinner has absolutely been peaking, but then again, we've got Djokovic as well, who has not, let's say, over the last 4 to 6 weeks been peaking. But I think Monte Carlo is going to be very interesting to see how deep he makes that run. So there's, I think, a little bit of a differential there between WTA, ATP, which is always interesting to share. And again, I did write about that last week. Though when we're looking really, I think, between the ATP's top 50%, we're picking at stones here because we have a number of standout players over the last, I will say, 4 to 6 weeks. And the others who are not, but they're inside the top 10, they have had positive performances already this season, but there's still, I'm going to say, 20% of these players, so that 2%, no, they're not at top 10 status. You've heard me mention those ones, whether it is we want to say run, living up to those expectations, but I'm definitely putting Rune up there to regress as far as his level of play is concerned over I would say this season so far. Most of the other players have been at some point this season. That said, we're looking at this snapshot, so over this say 4 to 6 week period, it really is that 50-50. Okay, that was a lot there. I hope you're keeping pace with me. But let's head straight into Houston. We touched on the earlier rounds last week, so we're going to kick off with the round of 16. Shelton over Berge's 3-set, very solid. Nakashima over Rinke, straight sets. Next we've got Purcell falling to Mo. Thompson over Kokovic. That was 4-6, 7-6, 7-6, very solid. TFO over Duckworth, 3 sets. Giron over Wolf, very good win for Giron over Wolf there, straight sets. Serralundo falling to Darderi, and that was the round of 16. All right, when we're looking at the quarterfinals, Shelton 7-5, 7-6. That was very close over Nakashima. Echeverry over Mo, 3-1. That said, the second set, there was a retirement from Mo because it was only a love 1 down. TFO over Thompson, but that was 7-6, 6-4. That was a good fight from Thompson. Daderi over Giron, 6-love, 6-4. All right, and we're going quick now. Semi-finals, this was solid. Shelton over Echeverry, 6-7, 6-4, 6-4. TFO over Darderi, 6-2, 7-6. The final, this was tight. Shelton over TFO. Great to see TFO make the finals. A little bit surprising his ranking has slightly regressed given this result. Nonetheless, 7-5, 4-6, 6-3. Could have gone either way. Great to see Shelton progressing, obviously, in the rankings with this title. TFO, great to see him back making the finals, obviously, of the Houston Championships as well. All right, over on to Hassan. Again, we touched on this briefly last week, so let's start at the round of 16 here. Fognini, he qualified. 3 sets win over Jerry, who was the number 1 seed. Kotovov over Kaboli, the 8th seed, straight sets. Cabellas Baena, straight sets over Evans, the 3rd seed. So it's a very good win. Goffins fell to Monero de Alboran, who qualified, straight sets. Berrettini, good win, 3 sets over Muna. Nagal fell to Sonegro, 3 sets. Wawrinka fell 3 sets to Navoni, and Vukic 3 sets over Offner. All right, over to the quarterfinals. Fognini fell to Kotov, straight sets. Carabellas Baena, 3 sets over Moreno de Alboran. Berrettini, straight sets over Sonegro, 6-3, 7-6. Navoni over Vukic, straight sets. And okay, going quick now, semi-finals. Carabellas Baena, straight sets over Kotov. Berrettini over Navone, 3 sets, 6-7, 6-3, 6-3. And the finals, Carabellas Baena falling to Barini, 7-5, 6-2, and Berrettini, my apologies. We know Berrettini was on his protected ranking, but look, he's back inside the top 100 now. He has a huge, has had a huge ranking progression, but also Carabellas Baena, he has benefited from that with his ranking. So it'll be very interesting to see how I think Carabellas Baena tracks forward, but also Berrettini. Let's see if he can hold his own with his ranking. Fingers crossed to see if he still has it in him to surge towards the top 10, but he's really going to be reliant on solidifying those 7 keys into his game before the 8th key. At this point, 1 or 2 of those keys and the corresponding metrics are there, but again, we're looking at an increase of application, but also that consistency when we're talking about establishing that baseline and those peak performance cycles before the new baseline and those peak performance cycles, and who can withhold that, and that's what differentiates, say, top 20 to top 10, or even top 50 to top 20. It's what is your baseline? What is that caliber of play? Who's pushing the markers? All right, over to Estoril. I think I pronounced that a bit different, Estoril, but hopefully you get the gist. You know what I'm talking about here. Over to the round of 16, because we did briefly touch on the round of 32 last week. Rudd over Van de Zandschulp, 6-1, 6-2. Very solid for Rudd. Monfils falling to Fucsovics in 3 sets. Gasquet, a very good win over Thiem. Even though I mentioned, I think, a lot on Thiem when we're looking at the rankings, Gasquet was a lucky loser. That said, he's still an absolutely solid player. He knows still how to pack a punch. However, Thiem, even though he's still inside the top 100, I'd love to see him track forward. It's really about him modifying his game and finding, I think, what works best for him. I'd really love to see him to activate his lower body more. So Thiem, if you're listening, if you want to manage that injury whilst looking at exacerbating those optimal performance parameters in your game, you know where to go. Okay, Bautista Agut fell to Martinez straight sets. Garin now over Fils in 3 sets. Garin was inside the top 20. He has regressed since then. I think top 20 2 to 3 seasons ago, and he had quite a substantial regression. That said, this is a very positive win for him. Mazzetti fell to Borges, 7-6, 6-3. A little bit surprising there, 3rd seed. All right, Labanez Ruiz qualified, and he got the win over Jorda Sanchez. Hercax over Chonsky, straight sets over the qualifier. All right, over to the quarterfinals now. Rudd over Fucsovics, straight sets, solid win. Gasquet did fall to Martinez, straight sets. Garin with another very good win over Borges, straight sets, and Hercax, straight sets again over Lama Ruiz. Semi-final stage, and now this was a little bit disappointing for Rudd, but exceptional for Martinez. Straight sets win, 6-4, 4-6, 6-3. This is what underscores why Rudd is more susceptible to regressing. So recall the 8%, 2% rule from How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking, and that places Rudd in that 2%. Even though he was flagged earlier this season to become a barrier breaker, and he has reached that new peak performance inside the top 10, it's really important to underscore he's not being able to maintain that set peak performance. So there's a little bit of a regression. But when we're looking at this level of play, the top 10, top 20 is absolutely peak performance metrics. It comes down to those micro discrepancies, and Rudd is not being able to maintain those key performance indicators when we're looking at those micro percentage points. Hercax, very good win over Garin, but that was 6-3, 3-6, 6-3. So that is a stellar performance for Garin. If he's able to maintain that type of performance over a top 10 player, I will not be surprised if Garin tracks forward closer towards the top 30 and potentially reaches his ranking high. But again, this is really 2 to 3 months of consistency followed by an additional 2 to 3 months. So essentially half the season, he really needs to maintain that baseline and build on those peak performance cycles. The final, Hercax over Martinez, 6-3, 6-4, exceptional for Hercax. Martinez, that's a standout because he got that win over Rudd, and still 3 and 4 scoreline is very solid. So it'll be very interesting to see how Martinez tracks forward, I think, especially in the clay court season, but also with this type of result. It's really positive to see. Okay, it's time now. We're not going to wrap up. It is Monte Carlo. Noteworthy, the WTA Tour does not have an event starting this week. ATP Tour does. That said, ATP Tour, my apologies, didn't have as many big events the previous week in contrast to the WTA Tour. So it's a little bit interesting. I do think, though, when we've been tracking the events so far this season, the ATP Tour has been more solid, more events for the players to partake in contrast to the WTA. So I'd really love to see, I think, the tours evening up the playing field there by offering the same amount of tournaments and at the same level. Fingers crossed. All right, round of 64. We've got the round of 64 and a couple of second rounds to go by. So to start with, Sorfin over Munar, a qualifier, but Sorfin 7-5, 6-1. Phil's over Hartmann, lucky loser, 6-love, 6-2. Now, how's this? Musetti with a very, very good win over Fritz, 4-4. So recall it was only last week Musetti had that early round loss, but this is a very good win for Musetti. Probably the most positive performance, especially granted it was over Fritz, this season, and to really, I think, underscore that top 30 ranking that he has been, I think, holding on to now for the best part of the last season. All right, Dibinor over Wawrinka. He got a wild card here. Very solid result from Alex, 6-3, 6-love. And Stan is definitely no walkover, so that is a very solid performance. But again, why Alex is really primed to ascend back inside the top 10. Grekenspor 3 sets over Kopfer. Poprin, a very good win over Monte, the qualifier, in 3 sets. A number of players did get buys, obviously, in the first round. Ogor Alisime, so Felix there, got a win over Nardi. So he qualified, but Ogor Alisime, 2 and 3, very positive to see. Zhang over Giron, 3 sets. That is a very solid performance. Humbert over Correa. Hercax, he backed up, I think, his recent title with a 3 sets win over Draper. That's great to see. It'll be very interesting if Hercax is able to maintain his current peak performance, similar to what Collins has done on, obviously, the WTA Tour with Miami and then Charleston. Let's see if Hercax is able to back that up. It'll be very interesting when we're looking at peak performance metrics and a player's capacity to maintain that and how long for. Bagusta a good win over Diaz Acosta, straight sets. Tibelia over Connell, the Aussie qualifier, straight sets, 3 and 4. Other rounds or players through to the second round, we've got Offner over Evans in straight sets, Echeverry over Jari, straight sets, Tsitsipas over Jerry, 3 and 2, very good to see. Norrie fell to Kakanakov in straight sets. Sarundo over Altima, straight sets. Monfils, very good win over Vucic, 7-6, 6-3, 7-5. Wrapping up, I think, those first round matches, Nagal qualified, a very good win over Analdi in 3 sets. Berrettini, he did fall to Kekmanovic in the first round. So this is a little bit disappointing, granted that he just claimed that title, 3 and 1. But it's a very good example of maintaining that peak performance level. Obviously, Berrettini, he has, let's say, lapsed. So when we're looking at a level to maintain that new baseline, or if it's just a peak performance before the drop comes, this is what's happened to Berrettini. So it'll be interesting to see how long Hercax can last, or if it can last throughout the event, as Collins, again, has been able to show. Swiatek's been able to show that early this season as well. So we're looking at that baseline and those peak performances, if it's a new level, so that new baseline, or if it was just a peak performance. A little bit contradictory there, but hopefully you are following. Okay, Dimitrov with a good win over Vakarov. He did get a wild card there. Korik, a very solid win over Bublik, 1 and 1. We haven't seen Korik with these type of wins lately. He previously was a top 30 player almost top 20 a few seasons ago, but Bublik has been performing exceptionally well so far this season on a rankings high, so there's a very good win for Coric. Struff over Baez, Korda over Davidova Fokina 1 and 2. All right, on to the second round very quickly before we wrap up today, but I'm going to go backwards here because Coric did fall to Struff 7-6, 6-1 in the second round. Only a couple of the second round matches have been underway, so it'll be very interesting to report on these next week. I'm really looking forward to see who's going to be able to hold their own. Zverev, a very good win over Ofner, 3 and 4. All right, next week we will wrap up on Hurkacz and Bautista Agut. That's going to be interesting. But other matches that have been underway as I'm tracking forward is Mazzetti. He was able to back up that win over Fritz, over Fils, 6-3, 7-5. And we've got Djokovic back in action. He did get a solid win under his belt over Siolun, 6-1, 6-2, which is great to see. Okay, I think it's time to wrap today's episode up. We've captured all of the WTA, and especially I want to say Charleston, and obviously the ATP Tour, but Monte Carlo is the one in action, and we will be looking up on that next week by pinpointing to see if Hurkacz is able to maintain that new peak. Djokovic is going to be very interesting to see if he's able to, let's say, regroup from the last 4 to 6 weeks and not living up to, let's say, his own expectations. But also, let's say, some key performance, I think, in here. We know Alcaraz was a late withdrawal, but it'll be very interesting, a couple of these players, whether Tsitsipas is able to progress. Likewise with Medvedev, who has Monfils in the second round. Rune, if he's able to live up to his ranking, or we'll see a regression there. But the same applies for Sinner with his new ranking high. We know he is number 2 in the world now. But if anything from today's episode, when we're looking at the rankings and those results, those key correlations and those data metrics, it's really important, I think, to underscore the relationship between the two. Hopefully you've picked up on these and those key insights to integrate into your game, whether you are top 10, top 20, top 100, or top 900 in the world, irrespective, each of those keys play a role. So to learn more of those keys, head on over to AIMA International. But I think the be-all and end-all really is about making those incremental moves, those key progressions to progressively ascend towards that top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got a lot out of today's episode. It really was, I think, more jam-packed than anticipated, wrapping up all of the events that really have, I think, taken or have been underway the past week and a bit, with some standout performances. But more so, I really want you to pay attention to those top 10 rankings and those key differentials. And I really would encourage you to read up on a couple of our latest blog posts that I have written to really support that, to provide, I think, additional insights, and some of them have some metrics in there that I think are really, insightful to allow you to look at how you are tracking in your own game. And the emphasis on a ranking in contrast to your performance. All right, to grab your copy of my new release, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking, you can find that on AMA International or Amazon, irrespective of where you are based in the world. For any comments or questions, head to AMA International or Topic Thread, the social platform set on data privacy. To interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Instagram or YouTube. To catch up on our blogs, head on over to AMA International and look for our blog tab, or head on over to Medium. And as always, I'll leave all the links in the episode notes. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. For something left of field, visit Spruik for some random polls. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. For those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available on AMA International, as well as options to work with me exclusively to optimize your performance and to nudge you closer towards that top 10 tennis ranking. So don't be shy, come and say hi. On that note, thank you so much for listening. I am so incredibly grateful. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.